Welcome everyone to How to Strategise for Online and Blended Education Post-COVID. I'm joined by a panel of experts from the higher education sector, so I'd love to introduce to you today David Lefebvre, Director of the EdTech Lab at Imperial College Business School, Tayyab Shah, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Global Partnerships at the University of Western Australia, and Neville Wiley, Deputy Principal of Internationalisation and Professor of International History at the University of Stirling. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll have mics scattered around the room again for this session, so if you do have any questions, please do either pop your hand up or we'll have some time at the end today as well for any questions. The COVID-19 crisis forced institutions to move their teaching online in a matter of weeks, sometimes just days. But as campuses around the world begin to tentatively reopen, institutions must consider what lessons have been learned as a result of the shift to digital delivery. Those institutions that implement robust strategies for a post-COVID learning environment will be well positioned to offer quality hybrid teaching moving forward. So I'd like to begin our discussion today by considering how institutions can seize this moment of transformation and make digital delivery part of their long-term strategies. David, perhaps you'd like to start us off today.
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's certainly an opportunity out there now because I think what we've seen is if you look at our experience at Imperial, lots of students, of course, want to move back on campus, but a significant proportion of them, particularly in postgraduate, actually see the benefits of the flexibility afforded by online. And if you take Imperial's experience and aggregate that across the sector, there's a significant increase in demand for online programs going forward. I think many of us are seeing that again and again and again. So there is an opportunity. And then on the supply side, of course, we have increase in capability. But I think the question that we're facing is who's going to seize that opportunity and who isn't. So I had a conversation with our provost yesterday, and his analogy was that we've stretched the elastic band. The crisis happened. We all moved into crisis mode, and there's an incredible amount of innovation. Everyone was pushed out of their comfort zone. All our programs were delivered online very, very quickly. But the question now is, it seems to be beginning to bounce back, and the question is, how far will it bounce back, and for whom? So I think there's an opportunity out there for sure. Some institutions are going to seize it, some might not. There might be new entrants coming in, and I think we really are at sort of a pivotal moment right now, actually, in how to get to grips with this opportunity or not. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's potentially going to be a time for institutions to bounce back, but I think there's also an opportunity for refinement, where there was perhaps sometimes a bit of a rush to make sure that everyone's teaching was consistent. There's now room for a real tightening of the offering and putting together something that provides real value for students and institutions and actually industry as well. So Tayyab, I wonder in terms of that refinement, how does that work into your strategy?
I think it's worth just noting that as we transitioned because of COVID to online, that was very much online out of necessity. And it was of variable quality, depending on how comfortable an individual academic or an academic unit was at delivering online. What we're now moving towards and having discussions within our institutions, and it's right that we are, is online by design. I've certainly said that the digital genie is out of the bottle. We can't go back. Whether it's pure online or it's a hybrid form, I think reality is most education, even on campus, will be hybrid. Whether the fact that students can now access through lecture capture, recordings of their lectures, our learning management systems have become far more sophisticated. EdTech companies have become much better and will continue to become much better at delivering teaching and learning of high quality. It therefore means that as institutions, we really do have to strategically look how we embrace that change, which in the case of some of the more research-intensive universities, that was never the case. UWA never had degrees online, and now we're having that discussion. We are looking at how we can do that in an effective way. And it's not quite as simple as taking what you're teaching on campus and transporting that into an online environment. It really is designed from the bottom up and having the right capability within the institution. So that's the debate. Do you look to in-house that capability, or do you outsource that by working with companies, edtech companies like Insendi and others in that space?
And Neville, what would your response be really to that question of, do you work with those platform providers, and what does online by design really look like? Is it about talking with industry partners and the teachers themselves? How do you design that to really work?
Well, I mean, I think that the challenge that the university sector has before COVID was really, it was either online or the traditional form. And there was quite a clear division there. What we've seen, obviously, is a rush online, as Tybe was saying. That spring back of the elastic band will need us to think about that hybrid form. And I think that provides an opportunity for universities here, because it suddenly enables us to think about place in a way that has always been the strength of British universities, has that been that very strong sense of identity of the place, whether it's in a campus university or not. But you can now meld that with an online delivery. Now, the interesting thing you mentioned there is opportunities to work with businesses. That online capacity gives you the opportunity to bolt in industry experience, industry ideas, and so forth into the delivery in a way that, again, was slightly clunky before. It was, because it was on campus or not. So I think, that division between online and the traditional offering has been smoothed off, and there's huge opportunities there for us. It'll take. The point that Ty mentioned about, do you, as it were, buy in expertise, or do you bring it from the bottom up? Clearly, I think from an institution's point of view, one of the big challenges that we've always had is trying to bring academics with us. Well, academics have had to come with us. Now I think there is an appetite for them to say, okay, so let's engage with these ed tech companies and so forth to think these things through. So I think it's a real opportunity.
If I can just pick up on that, I think I'm going to encourage everyone here to license the Insendi platform, and not just because I'm a founder of it, but I'm going to give you an unusual rationale for doing that. I think if we're going to make the move to quality, then we need firms like Insendi, like our main competitor Aula, like Feedback Fruits. There's entrepreneurs sort of across the country all trying to develop technologies that improve that student experience. And I think as a sector, we need to engage more with edtech companies generally, so not just Insendi. And I think what we saw during the pandemic was that if you think about what the sector did, everyone used their existing technologies. The main benefactor from the pandemic from a technology perspective was actually Microsoft, because everyone moved to Teams en masse or Zooms en masse. And actually that sort of edtech ecosystem, that burgeoning edtech ecosystem that's going to solve our quality problem, was not served during the pandemic. Feedback Fruits or someone knocked on the door of a university and said, do you want this new technology? The response was, sorry, I'm in the middle of a pandemic here, come back later. So I think if we're going to sort of emerge out of this pandemic, seize the moment and solve some of those quality problems, then as a sector, we do need to encourage all these edtech companies to grow and prosper and give them contracts and experiment and try. Because otherwise we'll be stuck with the same technology ecosystem. And I think we've learned the limitations of that. So there's an unusual argument to buy into.
Yes, I do think that the demands on academics and institutions have massively increased, and the quality of the delivery has to be foremost. And to be honest, I think a lot of the online programs pre-COVID were pretty standard, bog standard stuff. Now, much greater demands for interoperability, interactivity with students and so forth, and making sure that there's a student experience there. And one of the worries I think for universities before COVID was, how do we remain the University of X when we're online? And I still think that's a challenge. Stirling is a campus university. how do we bring that experience online and not become just like any other university? And I think that's still a challenge, but it's a challenge that could be grasped.
I think that's part of the solution, though. That people do retain their values. It's often, if you go to a typical university and look at the care and craft and control they put into their face-to-face programs, a whole array of people doing quality, doing course design, all these things. And universities do tend to sort of abandon that when it comes to sort of online and start afresh. But I think if people put the same kind of care into their online programs, the detailed care, then you both retain your identity and enhance quality, maybe. Yeah. And I know that Stirling are doing that.
One other point that I'd make is we need to be focused on the why question. Why are we moving online? What is the opportunity in moving online now? And I think part of that is innovation, as you've mentioned. I think it's an opportunity to reshape how degrees are taught, how they're offered, how we might bring in industry partners to co-curate. EdTech companies will often talk to you about unbundling and micro-credentials and the opportunity to attract a lifelong learning market. I think there's certainly opportunities in terms of inclusivity and accessibility and affordability. So in my role looking after global partnerships, University of Western Australia looks onto the Indian Ocean Rim. We're the only Australian city that looks onto the Indian Ocean Rim, and therefore I need to engage with universities in Africa, in the Middle East, in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I can't expect students to be coming in droves. Right now, no one can come into Australia, but even ordinarily, students from Africa would not be able to, and vice versa. So this is where we can embrace technology. We can not just talk about online learning for degree's sake, but virtual internships, virtual mobility, virtual exchange. These are all opportunities that the online platform affords us. So I think it really is, if we're answering that why question, I think it's why not. And it's when, it's now. It really is trying to say, okay, there's been a significant disruption in the system. It is an opportunity for innovation. Now, you could try and push that genie back into the bottle. I would suggest to you that that's impossible. And what is better is that you look at ways in which you can enhance the on-campus experience, but equally look at how you can reach other demographics that you traditionally were not. Now, interesting point around how do you make them feel connected to the university. In fact, I was having that debate earlier on with our Chief Advancement Officer who heads up our alumni function. And I was posing the question, these are individuals who will never set foot on our campus. How do we make them feel part of the UWA community? And how do we ensure that attachment so that there's pride in the institution, etc.? And I think that's partly where you can, again, use technology to bring in existing alumni to talk to your learners and talk about their experience. You can bring in footage of the campus, etc. It's no substitute for being on campus, but it certainly starts to build that connect. But I think this whole notion of how does a university identify in the digital domain will continue to evolve. And we shouldn't be afraid of bringing in, as I said, industry into co-curating some of those programs. We know the likes of Google and IBM are offering programs in the IT space. You can bring in others in other areas as well.
I'd like to speak a little bit more about the idea of how to enhance the on-campus experience. You said many students won't set foot on campus, but a lot of them will, and a kind of blended model seems to be the way that most institutions are set to move forward. So the campus its role will continue to be important. So maybe huge lecture theatres become much less of a worthwhile investment, but the campus is still going to be a real kind of hub for universities. What will the campus, the physical campus, look like in the future? David, maybe?
Yeah, I could answer that. I can give an answer to that. I think interestingly, there'll be a very big difference between undergrads. The undergrads, on the whole, want to come back on campus. There will be some changes around that. But the postgraduate space, I think, will be really interesting because we've always had hybrid learning. If you remember pre-pandemic, one of the trendy words was the flipped classroom. The idea that you did all the low-level learning online and then arrived on campus and did the real learning. And I always thought that was way too crude if you've had any experience of using kind of online technologies. But I think what's happening in the world of work is really interesting. I think we're here today, but we're probably going to go back to our homes to work later. The world of work is changing, and I think as we go through that transition, what we're really figuring out is, why do we need to be face-to-face, and what works at home? And we're figuring that out in the workplace. And at the moment, it seems to be that we're sort of coming to work twice a week and working at home 3 days a week. And the models are continuing being refined, and different companies are trying different things. But I think we will sort of, through that process, learn a new sort of model of hybrid. And I've no doubt that in the postgraduate space, that model, whatever it is, will be applied to learning too. So you can imagine a situation where students are doing the majority of their learning online, but coming into face-to-face for certain things, like maybe events or group projects. And when you figure out what is done on campus, that has significant implications for the campus, because maybe we don't need any lecture theatres. Maybe the postgraduate campus resembles a WeWork space or a co-working space or something like that. So I think it's too early to say, but we are working through a process here, and I'm sure it's going to have significant impact for the physical campus.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the person with the biggest challenge here is the head of estates, not the head of information services, who rub in their hands with a larger budget. I mean, even for the undergraduates, I think this idea of being on campus and therefore being on face-to-face. We had an experience the other day where I was with a colleague sitting in the cafe, and it was clear that the students on the other side of the table were in a seminar that was actually taking place down the corridor, but they preferred to do it from the seat, in the cafe rather than there. So it's not just, reconfiguring the university to have, the small group space for those really important interactions. I think we do need to mediate between, that student experience. And of course, students come to campus not just for the face-to-face teaching. It's also for the social interactions, it's for the sport and all of that. So I think the real challenge then is to find how we can, as it were, flip between the seminar room and the cafe and the sports room. That's going to be the challenge, and that's going to be a really, really difficult task.
It's about having flexible spaces. We saw that trend already in libraries. Libraries were now removing more and more of their collection and putting into storage. Space was being converted into study space, cafes, social areas, etc. I think that trend will continue. Some universities are being more radical, talking of removing lectures entirely from their repertoire, perhaps developing things like lectorials, that sort of hybrid again of the lecture and the tutorial and the seminar. So it's going to be about flexibility and making sure that we are able to accommodate the changing demand of our students. And we've got to listen to the student voices. I think David's absolutely right. It works online, purely online works for postgraduate. Typically working professionals, time poor with families, looking for career advancement, professional development. For undergraduates, I think the jury is still out. Technology needs to improve, and I can give you one explicit example. But when Australia closed its borders last February, we had over something like 1,500 students who were stuck, international students who were stuck overseas, who could not come back into Australia, and so therefore had to move immediately to online learning. Simultaneously in China, where COVID was by and large under control, I started to partner up with some of our Chinese partner universities and set up what we call learning centers or study centers. So it was, you can continue to study online with UWA, but you can get a campus experience. You live in a halls of residence, you get the peer support, you get some local academic support as well, access to clubs and sports and activities, cafeterias, so on. Now, in that first semester, I noticed that we only had a very small percentage, something like 20% of our students who went into that. By this last semester gone, we were hitting 60%. As online study fatigue started to set in, undergraduates were opting to move out of their parents' homes and go into campus universities. They wanted that companionship. They wanted access to those facilities. And so that's a very telling lesson for us. I think we're now talking, as our Minister of Education, Alan Tudge, talks, he says, we want more not study in Australia, we want you to study with Australia. He's signalling more online. And I think that could work to an extent in a hybrid fashion, but it will not substitute, certainly at the undergraduate level, that on-campus experience. And it's horses for courses, but by and large, most undergraduate students want that on-campus experience.
I can comment on that. I mean, I think it's interesting that our conversations moved on very quickly to sort of a vision of the future. And all the capability that we built up during the pandemic was not to deliver the vision that we're talking about. The capability we built as a sector was delivering, a rapid response approach. And I think there are lots of people who have questions around the quality of that. And then the ideas that we're discussing now, changing the campus, implementing short courses, raising quality. When you think about what is necessary to implement these from a university, it's significant. We're talking changing the physical buildings, new jobs, new structures, new strategy, new ambition, new job roles. It isn't easy to implement these things. But right now, I think as a sector in the UK, where lots of people are just exhausted from what's happened. I think it's not uncommon to hear enough innovation. Thanks, I've just come out of the pandemic. So whether the sector can actually sort of seize this vision that we're articulating is questionable, and it'd be interesting to see how far people get. What can they do given the general tiredness, the usual constraints that we're facing. I think that would be interesting to watch. I think. Yeah.
Neville, I think you, or maybe it was Taya, briefly mentioned the importance of alumni engagement. And I'd like to also speak a little bit about lifelong learning, obviously another increasingly important aspect of institution strategies. Do you think that blended, online, digital tools, all of those kind of innovative changes that we've seen over the last 18 or so months make a lifelong learning model more achievable and more widely achievable as well? That's a lot of nods, but...
Well, yes. I mean, we've invested a lot on online materials and online courses, and the exciting thing that we're trying to do now is say, okay, well, we've got this capability. Why don't we offer it to all our alums? And it's, a little bit of it, but it gives us the opportunity to be real again for our 74,000 alums in a way that, frankly, we hadn't been before. So if it's a little project management course or something on accountancy, that's what we can. So I think we can be much more sort of real for our alums in a way that we hadn't been before. So that's a very easy way of doing it. And it also means that it does change the kind of financial calculus, because it does cost a lot of time, space, and treasure and headspace to move stuff online and make it quality. To be able to say it's not just about bums on seats in the master's programs, but we can share content with our partner networks, or we can reach out to our alums through these ways. There's lots of different ways that you're using this material, and that, as I say, it changes the calculus. It's not easy to get your head around it, but there's no doubt that that's the really exciting space I think we can move into.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I think Neville makes a really good point about international networks. We know the EU is promoting the university alliances. Yeah. That is one of the avowed aims to be able to offer content across those partner networks. We're certainly looking at that as well. If you've invested in quality online content, you want to be able to maximize the return on that in a myriad of ways. But certainly offering it to alumni is a quick win. Offering it to university staff, also a quick win. I think it affords an opportunity to help them upskill, reskill, etc., be relevant throughout the learning journey of all of our students, and not just those who leave at the age of 21, 22. And as universities, we've certainly all moved into short courses, into executive education and continuing education, CPD, etc. So I think it's important that we're able to harness the flexibility that online learning affords us, working either in partnership with edtech companies or doing it in-house, or indeed both, and then being able to reach different demographics. So again, Western Australia, UWA, in Western Australia, which is about a third of Australia, as you can imagine, very remote communities struggle to come to Perth, and therefore now we have the opportunity to use technology to be able to deliver quality learning. And in fact, we can use that same technology because we're in the same time zone as the +8 GMT time zone as China, much of Southeast Asia, etc. We could have synchronous teaching. So there are wonderful opportunities. And I think, David, you were saying, we've got to bring the academics along, and that's a key part of that, because they are tired from all that's been asked of them. And certainly we asked at UWA, not only because we didn't have COVID in Western Australia, so they were teaching on campus, but also having to teach online at the same time. That's quite a challenge for any academic to be able to marry the two together. So I think certainly they've acquired a lot of new skills in how to use online much better. Our learning and development units have gotten better at the instructional design piece, at training academics as well. But there's a long way to go. And as I said, technology is getting better and better. And you take one facet that we were deliberating was exams. Well, how do you proctor exams remotely? And there's software solutions for that, and they're not perfect, but they're certainly moving and getting better at that whole assessment piece. So as those bricks start to fall into place, I think it becomes even more important that traditional universities look to how they can either work in partnership with other providers or in networks or individually move into that online learning space.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting, the role of the providers, because I think this idea of lifelong learning being necessary in the knowledge economy is something we've been talking about forever. And the universities have never really sort of engaged with it in a meaningful way. There was a major initiative at Oxford a few years ago where they had around 85 online courses, but didn't gain traction in the market. But I think what was happening pre-pandemic was that firms like Emeritus and Get Smarter were showing us how to do it. They, if you look at the online courses they were building, it's identical to the courses we were building inside the sector, but they were much bolder when it came to digital marketing. I think what they've shown us is that if you want to enter that online short course space, then you have to be adept at digital marketing, and you have to be bold and brave, because the money you need to invest when you're competing with everybody else globally is very significant. And I think we're partnering with them now, perhaps, but the university are only sort of engaged in this short course lifelong learning space in a meaningful way if they build digital capability in marketing and are bold and commit money to all those ads, because I think that's what it's all about, really. I think you have to be much more aggressive in marketing in that space than you do for degree programs. So I think, again, I think the edtech sector is sort of showing us the way and how to do it.
And that's a different skill set, marketing online versus going to student fairs and recruiting your traditional students, working through agents and so on. So our marketing and student recruitment outfits are typically not set up to be able to target that demographic online. And so again, it comes back to the point that as universities, this perennial debate, do you in-house or do you outsource? And I think we're now moving to that space where more and more is being outsourced, which is not core to our purpose and our mission. And whether it's pathway programs, in some cases campuses, so I know my former institution, King, started to lease buildings as opposed to own them, and you focused on the teaching and learning. So how much can you outsource? And I think online has become that next dimension where we're having this debate as to, can that be outsourced, or is it actually integral to what we do? Right. Do we blend it much more tightly with our on-campus programs, or do we design programs that are specific and bespoke to the online environment? And that debate is still ongoing. And institutions will come up with different answers depending on their particular strategic focus.
But to be fair, the biggest challenge we had was bringing marketing along to say, this is what we need to do. Can you do it for us? And these companies, OPMs, will say, well, we'll throw £1 million at that marketing, and that's what is required. And you're having those discussions when you've still really got to convince the university that this is going to be new business as normal. So that's the real challenge. To some extent, we're absolutely right. The academic colleagues are absolutely exhausted, and that will definitely slow the capacity to change. But it's those other bigger structural questions that I think are really fundamental to our ability as a sector to get into this space and thrive as opposed to just survive.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left of our session, maybe 15 today, which leaves us some time for some questions from the audience. We've got some mics dotted around as well, I think. So if anyone does have any questions for our panel, please do just pop your hand up.
Thank you very much for the information. One thing that came post-pandemic very fast in the tech environment was the real need of the university as a 4-year, for example, completely about computer science, computer engineering, the areas that the information is out there, and people were like, in our field of like technology, they were like joking, if you need to pay $30,000 per year for the same information that you get, way more updated information, you get it like for free on the internet. And putting the experience of the students aside, do you see a world that couple of universities start but one thing that is like obvious in the computer science and the developer community, that 4-year undergrad is overkill. Like you don't need 4-year undergrad, and you could see the trend of how fast the boot camps are going up, and 2 to 6 months you become a developer, you find a good job, the ROIs increase, and you learn at the job versus like you learn just the theory. Do you see, like, at what point do you see that universities start really shifting toward a more practical, at least in those fields like computer science, and training developers to like go in that path, or you think they never catch up and we will see a disruption?
I think we're already seeing that. Some universities have taken that particular route, working much more agile, looking at accelerated models of degrees, working closely with industry, and industry sees value in working with universities. I mean, I mentioned before Google and IBM, yes, they've set up their own qualifications and so on, but equally, they cherish the accreditation of institutions, and that, I think, is an opportunity for us not to lose. The question, I think, that underpins what you're saying is, the degree, 3 years, 4 years, is that the right model? For some industries, it may not be. But I think it's a question of each institution will tackle this in a different way, and there will always be a place for those who want face-to-face learning, want that 3-4 year formative experience, certainly at the undergraduate level. There'll be others who want an accelerated 2-year degree, and it's about choice, and it's about flexibility, and indeed it's about affordability. So I think we are certainly, as all consumers, we're much more driven in what we're expecting, and someone once called it the sort of the Netflix of online learning. You should be able to choose as and when you want to study online. I'm not sure about that. And I think there's lots of debates, and as the technology improves, it may make it better and easier. But it comes back to what's the purpose of an education. If it is solely to get you a job in something like computer science and IT and so on, then yes, you could do it all online. But equally, if you're looking for that experience, that formative experience in your sort of late teens, early 20s, then you will cherish the face-to-face, on-campus experience where you make friends for life and you participate in activities that you might not otherwise have. So we already can see that in the higher education space, lots of private providers moving down a particular career-focused, profession-focused route, others looking very much at a holistic education approach.
The only thing I'd add to that is, you focus on the computer science, disciplines. What I think is really challenging for non-computer science disciplines is the importance of giving a digital education to everybody on the campus. So whether you're studying, ancient history or maths, you've got that opportunity to be trained up in these skills that are going to be absolutely vital, for the next 10, 20 years. And that is certainly where we're looking at, again, online materials to try and map them across our entire curriculum so that anybody is kind of a little bit more future-proof than they would without that sort of spine of digital literacy and an ability to grasp the power of data, irrespective of what discipline they're talking about.
Did
Very
anyone...
quick answer.
No, please carry on.
It's a really interesting question because I think it's right that the boot camps and people are putting pressure on the university to consider the length of the degree. But I also think that you can't learn computer science in 3 months. I don't think you can learn computer science in 6 months. These areas that we talk about as being necessary for society, like computer science, AI, maths, these are becoming increasingly hard, increasingly complex. And from an imperial perspective, it's hard to put everything into the 3-year degree. And I think you're beginning. So I think it's great that people are putting pressure on, but the idea that you can become an expert in computing in 3 months, I'm not convinced by that. And I think what you're seeing in the US now is a bit of a backlash against these boot camps because people like Google and Amazon have been hiring people and realize they don't have the depth of skill. So I think it's interesting that the pressure's being put on and forcing universities to consider the length. But I think actually, because of the nature of these subjects, the nature that they're getting increasingly more complex, actually, you have to put all those hours in to actually learn them properly. Yeah. Do you disagree with that?
Yeah. It depends.
Yeah.
Right now, the whole world of application is changing the computer science to no code. So developers are becoming more hackers than actually sit down and write the logic from day one. So I learned coding when I was 14 without knowledge of English from an English book.
Yeah.
So yes, you can learn how to become an application developer in, I think, 3 months. But can you write a new algorithm for example, search? Probably not. Probably you need a good PhD from Stanford.
Exactly.
But I also don't think you can get a PhD from somewhere else and you can disrupt Google.
Yeah.
So it depends. The world of computer science is literally eating every single industry in so many cases. You really need a very deep knowledge. In so many cases, you really need no knowledge. You just need persistent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. There's someone else over here, I think.
Hi, Joan from the University of York. I wanted to pick up on Tayyeb's phrase of a holistic education, and bearing in mind how much the technology is moving under our feet, is there more we should be thinking about as a sector about how we measure both soft and hard outcomes over a long period of time so that we establish what the perfect blend is in terms of the social and peer-to-peer engagement that so many of our students say they want. But as future of work evolves, the likelihood that more bundled learning is going to be necessary as people progress through their careers. So I'm wondering about whether there is the necessity for a more common framework of measurements to understand the depth of learning that we get from either face-to-face or blended or online.
Short answer is yes. I think, and it's always evolving. And so it's certainly timely now because of this disruption and the opportunity for innovation that a lot of institutions and individuals have grasped that it's right we're having these discussions as to what is the purpose of the university education that we're offering. It's not cheap, what we offer. People are looking for value for money. We know because of economies that have been hit by COVID and the like that that's a significant pressure. So I come back to my point that online affords you the ability to be more flexible and affordable as an institution and in terms of what you offer. But coming back to what is the right mix, I think that's a discussion that we have to be having much more closely with industry. Because as others have done, some industries have decided they'll go off in their own way. Even in professions like law, they feel that they're not getting the quality of graduate that comes to them. And so we certainly have to have much more dialogue, and we certainly shouldn't be afraid of the fact that we have offered a degree in a particular form before. Doesn't mean we have to offer it in that form going forward. You know, I welcome this debate of whether we need lectures or not, whether we need more campus space, more flexible space, less space, whatever. It's, you know, universities, whether we admit it or not, we've always been changing. We are by nature conservative, of course we are, and we're glacial in our pace of change and all of that, but we are changing. And you know, the university of today is nowhere like the university of 20 years ago or 50 years ago. So I think we certainly have to have what is that right mix between online versus face-to-face. That will vary from, I suspect, from institution to institution. It will vary certainly by discipline as well. Some that are more industry-facing will want more face-to-face interaction or virtual or whatever. But you know, in my role, where I look after the global partnerships of a university, I'm interested in how do we equip all of our students with a global mindset so that they understand the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they understand what global citizenship means, they understand and are respectful of other cultures, nations, traditions, and so on. How do we bake that into our curriculum so that we are giving them that holistic outlook and helping shape their view of the world and helping them understand their place in the world? Because it isn't just about being in Western Australia in Perth. It is about being able to then go to London, to Cape Town, to Kigali or to Washington, D.C. You have to accept that the world of work with multinationals and so on means that we've got to equip our students with that global mindset. So that's what I'm enjoying, is that challenge of, well, how can we do that using online technology? You know, so whether it's things like COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, which is a pedagogy, allows us to harness technology and get students talking to one another without necessarily being not aligned to our sustainability strategy as a university. I think those are the sorts of challenges we're all grappling with. And so I welcome the fact that we're having these kinds of discussions. We will continue to have them. We always have. And I think that we should all embrace online, but we'll do it at different paces and to different extents.
I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's not just about putting an assessment, a quality assessment on the online. It's how much value are we giving to all the other bits that we're trying to put into this mixture to make a difference and to justify the fee and the years and so forth. And I think we're probably very good at assessing and quality assuring academic outcomes. There's probably a lot of work that we need to do as a sector around all those other soft skills, experiences, and so forth that, you know, are wrapped up in this discussion about online and hybrid and whatever. But I think it is broader than just that. And I suspect that every university will, at the end of the day, get the mix that it wants. But having some sector-wide, you know, firm measurements that we can start using in this space, I think will be really useful. It's a great question.
Thank you. We've got perhaps time for one more question. There's someone just at the front here. I don't want to keep anyone from their lunch for too long.
I'll try to be quick.
Thank you.
So just following up on that really good question, I was wondering about price structures, because so far higher education is one price for, let's say, home student and another one for international student. But as we're moving into a sort of online offer with fierce competition, what are your thoughts about charging a premium for in-person education versus online, or how would it work for you?
Quite complicated one.
That is it's a very good question. If I can quickly jump in on that one. So the debate we all had was, okay, we as universities are having to move all of our content online. It's costing us a lot of money to do that. And that's the justification for still charging the same fees, particularly to international students who are getting no campus experience, no international experience studying online. I don't think that holds long term. And I think that with the unbundling aspect of online learning, the fact that you can offer micro-credentials and so on, you can move to a much more flexible pricing model. And I certainly believe that this model of, the traditional model of charging more for our international students on campus versus our domestic students, because they're somehow, in the case of research-intensive universities, are subsidizing research, etc. I think that model needs to be questioned. And equally, I think we've got to move to in the online space, a price-to-market strategy. So you should be charging different price points depending on where the learner is located. If they're in Africa, you charge a certain price point. If they're in the Middle East, another price point. If they're in Europe, a third. Dynamic pricing, pricing to market, technology allows us to do that.
I could give a quick answer. I think rather than sort of a home rate and an international rate, what we really have is sort of a regulated price and a market price. So the home student undergraduate price is a regulated price set by the government, and the higher price charge to international students, particularly in the postgraduate space, more like the market price. So what we're seeing is a discrepancy between regulated and market, and the market price for degrees from our very selective universities is very high and too high for the majority of young people to afford. So I think one interest of mine is whether we can use technology to make these postgraduate degrees more affordable, and I think they can, and hopefully that will be something that emerges over the course of next years.
I'll keep it very quick in case my CFO is listening. But I agree. I think there is the opportunity with online to get, as it were, product to market at a reduced rate over time, and then we really benefit from having international students in our classroom. That's a real value, it seems to me. That's what they're bringing. And secondly, of course, there's the huge benefit of not putting them on planes to get them over here. That is, to me, the fundamental reason why we have 20% of our PGT portfolio online now, and that's fantastic because we're not spending carbon to get them here. And yet they're still being part of that community and enriching the learning experience of everybody in that space.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of our session today. So I'd love to thank the three of you again for joining us and for sharing your insights and experience, and also our audience for coming along and asking your questions as well.